we have a very special guest for you today, Miss Ashley Avis. And I just wanted to pop in and say before the show gets started to let you know that we had a bit of technical difficulty in this recording. Recently, Alyssa and I have purchased some new recording equipment, and we're still working out all the bugs and details with that. And so my microphone was not working really well at the time, so I wound up just jumping off of the conversation altogether. And it turned out Alyssa and Ashley had a fantastic, heartfelt conversation that we are sure you are going to enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Reinforce the Horse. Today we are here with Ashley Avis. And Ashley is a 36-year-old award-winning writer, director, editor of 6 featured films, including Disney's Black Beauty, starring Oscar winner Kate Winslet, the upcoming City of Angels for Warner Bros., based on Wim Wenders' classic, and the critically acclaimed Wild Beauty, Mustang Spirit of the West. Wild Beauty, which has won numerous awards on the film festival circuit, and debuted in May 2023, marked a 5-year-long passion project for Avis. The documentary is a cinematic journey into the world of wild horses, along with a journalistic exposé into the corruption befalling them. The film has been called groundbreaking and has garnered support from major environmental organizations, lawmakers, celebrities, and children. A passionate advocate for horses, Avis is the founder and president of the Wild Beauty Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization which rescues horses and creates educational programs for children. Ashley and her husband and producing partner, Edward Winters, co-founded Winterstone Pictures in Los Angeles. Welcome, Ashley. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Alyssa and Jason, for having me.
So, Ashley, you have a wealth of knowledge and experience, really, as a journalist going into the throes of the wild Mustang captures. But before we get into all that, and it's going to probably be quite emotional as we discuss that, can you give us a little bit of your background as to how you entered the world of horsemanship?
Well, like so many people, I grew up with great equestrian-themed novels. Horses were always the animals that I gravitated most to as a young person, as a child, and the great novels like The Black Stallion by Walter Farley and Black Beauty by Anna Sewell were really important books in my youth, and they shaped a lot of my childhood and inspired me to just want to be amongst the world of horses. And I competed a little bit as a hunter jumper when I was a kid and a teen, but it was so much more than that. I just wanted to be around horses, and I think to a lot of horse people that makes sense. And my world really came full circle after high school. I went to college in New York City, and I worked as a journalist as well as a number of different odd jobs to pay the rent in Manhattan. I was a web designer, a real estate agent. I taught ballroom dance to wedding couples. I just, a lot of things that you do when you're younger and aspirational, all while setting my sights on becoming a writer. And that morphed over time. When I was a young person, I thought I'd become a novelist. That transformed into a pursuit of journalism. And then when I was in college studying international business and marketing, I ended up coming across my first screenplays, and I was 19 years old. And the screenplays felt like poetry. And that was one of these moments people talk about, having that moment in life where you realize exactly what you're supposed to do. And it was in reading my first screenplays that was exactly it. And so I saved up some money, moved to Los Angeles, had a number of different odd jobs there, and eventually started building a production company, first with small commercials that eventually grew into bigger commercials. I ended up meeting my now husband and producing partner, and we ended up being able to put together a little bit of money for our first 2 feature films that we produced independently. And after about a decade of really hustling and putting everything on the line and taking risks and making plenty of mistakes, we built a portfolio of work that in our industry, you just start taking those bigger steps, and in 2017, I ended up having a really important meeting with a wonderful producer named Jeremy Bolt, who we sat in his office over tea, and he said, what inspired you to become a filmmaker? And I said, The Black Stallion, and that scene on the beach with Alec and the black, and this moment of, there's no dialogue in that scene. It's all about this mysterious communication that humans can have with horses. And it's set to score, and it's about body language, and it's about connection and emotion. And I went into that for a couple of minutes, and then I looked up and I realized I was rambling a little bit. And Jeremy was smiling, and he said, my partner and I have wanted to remake Black Beauty for 10 years. If you have a take, let me know. And I had a take right away, and I ran home and put together this 40-page long pitch, sent it to him in about 10 days. And it was very much in wanting to honor Anna Sewell's themes. And she wrote Black Beauty as an animal welfare plea for the horses of her time, the cab horses and the carriage horses that didn't have voices. And back then, our understanding of animal empathy and animal intelligence was different than it is now. And we still have a long way to go, even here in 2023. And so in wanting to honor why she wrote that novel, in modernizing our Black Beauty, I started researching issues that could become a parallel to her original themes. And that's when I discovered the plight of wild horses. And I had no idea, even as an equestrian in my youth, the level of corruption and animal abuse that was going on. And so that eventually led to the journey of our documentary, Wild Beauty.
So tell us more. How did you get interested in actually going out and filming wild horses and ultimately creating Wild Beauty?
So the original intention in 2018, when my husband and I put our independent film hats back on, and because I really, for authenticity reasons, I really wanted to feature real wild horses in Black Beauty, which obviously was a narrative film. It was eventually acquired by Disney. It wasn't originally a Disney production, so our budget was still quite limited. It was a good budget, but it didn't, there wasn't a huge amount of flexibility to go off into the wild and film wild horses. And so we spoke with the producers, who were incredibly supportive of the vision. And Ed, my husband and partner, and I, we raised a little bit of money in 2018 to go out to Wyoming, Utah, and Nevada. And we were able to film the beauty of wild horses and their families in their wild habitat. And then we witnessed our first roundup. We filmed the Triple B roundup of the roundup of the Triple B, rather, in Nevada. And my heart broke in a way that I've never experienced, watching that and seeing what the horses have to go through, running in 100-degree heat and being chased by helicopters flying at eye level. I mean, I feel funny even saying this because it's so little compared to what they go through, but having filmed enough roundups now, I can't look at helicopters the same. So I can't imagine the level of trauma these horses undergo and how that could last for a lifetime. And after filming that roundup, which really informed how I approached the scenes in Black Beauty, and that film was for, 8, 10, 12 plus, we had to be very careful, but I feel like kids can handle a lot more than we think they can. And so we balanced it in Black Beauty, but we wanted children to understand what wild horses were going through in that film. But after capturing that in real life and then also owning the footage, because we raised the money ourselves, Ed and I realized we had to keep going because so few people know about this issue. And I think that's the biggest problem with it. And that's why the Bureau of Land Management is getting away without its hand even being slapped with so many violations and so much animal cruelty and so much corruption, in my opinion. So yeah, after it started in 2018, really, and then continued, we finished post in early 2023, and the film came out in May. So we're hoping the film does what Blackfish of the Cove did for their species and raises an unprecedented awareness for wild horses, casts a spotlight on the truth, and becomes a tool for other people to use to show their lawmakers or to talk about. And we're hoping it has a greater ripple effect in that iteration as well.
I'll say that film has greatly impacted me in my life and the way I see my horses and their family. I can't even begin to explain how much that film has done for me. And so to our listeners, any of you who haven't seen that film, I highly, highly, highly recommend it.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad.
Can you recall your earliest memory being around horses?
Oh, goodness. I think, my earliest memories, I suppose, Well, I can see it's funny. My mom sent me some early childhood photos a couple of years ago that I don't remember, but I was on a little pony at maybe 2 years old. But the first memories I have, it was after watching Black Beauty with my best friend. I was born in Chicago, grew up in Florida, and we were watching Black Beauty, and we had all these little Breyer horses in her bedroom, and we were playing with them in their little stable. And I went home that day and I begged my parents for riding lessons. And my friend, I still can't remember her name now, but my friend rode at a stable that her parents told my parents about. And then a few weeks later, I was there and I fell in love with this. It was this beautiful, beautiful horse. She was this cobalt mare called Delilah. And I think she was a Tennessee walking horse. I can't recall, but she was just it was maybe because I was so inspired by Black Beauty and the Black Stallion that I was just drawn to the darker horses. And she was the most beautiful animal that I had ever seen in my life. And of course I didn't get to ride her right away. I got to ride a little pony called Little Red. And on my third lesson, Little Red, it was my fault. I got between Little Red and some hay, and Little Red ran right over me. I was 7 years old. And I remember having a little hoof print on my back, and it didn't deter me at all. I've loved horses since I could be in their presence. And it's always been them, which is why it's been so special that after you go away for college and you start your professional career, and sometimes things change in your 20s as you're trying to stay afloat in a major city or trying to start a business or trying to make it in your respective industry, for horses to come back has been really profoundly special and feels very, very meant to be with the work we're doing now.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with Delilah and Little Red. When you were there with those wonderful equines, do you recall any lessons that those two in particular taught you as you were with them?
Certainly patience, and also opening your eyes to the natural world around you. I think a lot of kids probably have a similar story, but I was really shy when I was growing up. I was the kid on the playground literally reading poetry or the thesaurus, which the latter didn't help with a lot of friendships. Let's put it that way. But horses were such big healers in my life as a young person, and we're all trying to find our way, and horses really helped me find mine. They were always confidants, and they don't judge you, and getting to go to the stable after school and letting some of that, and every kid deals with it in some way, but letting some of that pettiness just fall away and to be with a being so pure and so present, it was life-changing. And that's why I'm so happy when friends of mine, I don't have children yet, but friends of mine who have kids, and they say we're taking them to a stable or we're going to give our daughter her first riding lessons, I kind of have a little cheer inside, because I hope they continue, because it's such it's people who get to be around horses are so deeply fortunate. And so I've learned a lot of lessons from them, particularly, being patient, being present, and looking at the world around us, because it's magnificent.
That is absolutely beautiful. They have so many lessons to teach us. And the more that I exist around them, the more that we exist around them, the more we uncover just how beautiful and perfect and how understanding they are and how much they have to teach us. The wild horses are a completely different, different in a good way. They have a completely different background than, say, one that is used to the stable environment and riding and all sorts of other things. What was your first experience with wild horses?
The first wild horses we saw were the Anaki in Utah, and that's why that herd is so important to me, and is such a major part of the documentary, and the horses I think about the most when you're trying to soldier on and trying to support legislation and some of these things we're trying to do. I often think of them and their freedom, and some of the horses that were lost or have passed away. But seeing wild horses in the wild for the first time was unlike any other experience I've had in my life. There's just they're the embodiment of freedom. They're the embodiment of wild, and to be able to even be around them and have them, take a look at you and have the sense of with the Aniki, I felt a sense of trust from them that built over the years of visiting them to the point where we were able to walk amongst them while keeping a respectful distance, of course. But that this feeling of, as you know, horses are so deeply intuitive, and to be able to share the sense of, I'm not going to hurt you, you're not going to hurt us, we're just going to exist in this moment together on the mountain at sunset. And it's like they had a sense of knowing that we were there to do something for them. I really do believe that. And after the years of filming wild horses, particularly when we were able to raise enough money to be out in the field for a month at a time versus just 2 weeks, because we cobbled the funds together as we went along to create this project. It wasn't completely consecutive. And in 2021, particularly, we had these long stretches in the wild, and we were driving around all of the Western US. And to just be able to be out there and to not for a couple of weeks even visit a major city, and to feel like you start assimilating into the wild, there was such a sense of joy that unlocked in this, where you start shedding kind of the, I need to check my email every 12 seconds. Let's just be amongst horses and trees and nature. That was such a purifying kind of cleansing experience that I think our entire crew felt to different degrees. At a certain point, we didn't really want to come home. And that's, I feel like, what the horses and the spirit of wildness really gave us.
That is beautiful. It sounds like they unlocked your inner wild as well as the inner wild of your crew.
Yeah, I think so.
In the film, you talk about a few of them, or a good amount of them actually, had names. Is there any significance to any or all of their names?
A lot of the names were given by different photographers or advocates that have been out in the wild. And I think the rule that I've heard is the first person that sees a full-born or photographs a horse, that they get the right to name that horse. And some of the horses have a couple of names or two names. For example, Norman, he also has, I forget what his other name was, but a few of them have more than one name. But the family that we talk about in Wild Beauty, the family that didn't have any names that we were aware of, and we called the full Suncatcher, which it just felt so appropriate. We were out. It was one of the most beautiful days we spent with the Aniki when we filmed that family, where we were at the back of a mountain, and it was an area where photographers, except for the one that we were with, usually don't necessarily go. Tourists definitely don't go that far behind the mountain. And the grass was lush, and just there were maybe 50 or 60 horses all around us. And that little family was just so special. And it just felt like the world was gold. And this beautiful little filly was just resplendent with the feeling of the sun. So we called her Suncatcher. And then her stallion, this, again, a cobalt black stallion who had the longest mane, and he had wind knots in his mane, particularly this one that was so long. And we actually have a close-up of it in the film because it's so beautiful. And that's why wild horses, they not only interact differently, but they look so different in their wind tousled manes. And so we called him Wind Knot. And thankfully, I just found out a few weeks ago that Suncatcher was actually adopted by somebody that reached out to us, who adopted her mother as well. And the mare was pregnant when this adopter pulled her out of the BLM pen. And then she adopted, I believe, Suncatcher after that. And the mare has given birth to, I believe it's a filly called Charlotte. And now that adopter is looking for Wind Knot. So we're trying to see if we can help find Wind Knot. So
that is beautiful.
Thank you.
That is absolutely, absolutely gorgeous. Those horses, I don't know what it is. I've heard so much about so many different wild horse herds, and the Aniki speak to so many people, more so than a lot of other herds. I don't understand how or why that is. I've heard a number of different people, that have visited wild horse herds, and I personally haven't, but I would like to.
You've got to get out there.
It's a dream. It is a dream of mine to be able to sit with them. But after sitting with, a number of different horse herds, is there anything in particular other than them being the ones that opened up and it seems like the rest of the crew's wild and the interest. Is there anything else different about the Anarchy that stands out to you more than the Triple B horses?
Well, what's so special? I think every horse herd deserves equal protection. So I'll preface what I'm about to say with that because I sincerely mean it. I find it even more preposterous in some ways that, and to me, sometimes I feel like the Bureau of Land Management, which is the agency tasked to manage wild horses, which in my opinion, it is not doing properly at all. I feel like sometimes the BLM likes to punish advocates and remove certain horses. Again, that's just my opinion based on years of observation. But for a herd like the Anarchy, which is a herd that is outside of a major city, they're 45 minutes or so, an hour away from Tooele. I mean, so close to Salt Lake City, which is a major hub. It's a major airport. The fact that the Anarchy or a herd like San Wash Basin in Colorado, they can be visited by so many tourists a year. And why these states with herds that accessible and that kind of desensitized to humans, because plenty of people go out to visit them. So you can be in your RV or your SUV and drive around and usually see horses right off the road. And again, it's so important to keep a respectful distance. It's so important not to feed them. Horses have choked on apples because that's not something they find in the wild. And tourists think, oh, the horse will eat an apple. And they actually choke, and horses have passed away in the Anarchy herd from that. But outside of those, human errors, it's such a beautiful thing to be able to fly into Salt Lake City or fly into Denver and take a road trip with your family and go see wild horses and really get to immerse in watching them for hours because they're so used to people. It's almost like going into Yellowstone, where some of those animals are a little bit more desensitized, and to be able to study their family dynamics and start picking out the different family bands and seeing the way certain stallions are trying to, steal a mare or get their first mare, or just all these magnificent interactions that it's harder to see in herds that are perhaps more remote, that aren't as used to humans, where some of the herds we visited during the documentary journey, we would drive in for hours and finally spot the horses miles away through our binoculars. And you get a few miles away and they're gone. And you just see teeny tiny, tails in the wind. But so I think that I think it's so important that some of those herds that are inspiring our sense of wonder for wild horses that are accessible, like Anarchy or Salt Lake or San Wash Basin, I think those states absolutely need to lean into the tourism more and advertise the magnificence that's in their own backyard. And that's why I think that those herds are particularly important. And perhaps that also lends to people being so excited to have gotten to see a wild horse, because they can actually see a wild horse up close. So I think that's very important to preserve.
That is fair. I hear that, and I feel that in my being. It's so controversial, the roundups, and most of all of my being doesn't understand the controversy around it, because I don't see it as necessary as, Have you gotten to visit with any of the Anarchy horses that have been rounded up?
In holding, after they were rounded up, we went to the Delta holding facility, even though we were told we weren't allowed to film. Thankfully, the sheriff in that town said, I don't agree with that, and allowed us to film. I have not visited for example, I was telling you about Stargazer, who is the stallion in our film, this magnificent pinto stallion who we got to know over the years. He was thankfully adopted with his favorite mare, who's called Nora, and they're living in Pennsylvania now. And I have an invitation from that adopter to go see them and get to, interact with them once we get back over there. But so I honestly haven't had the heart to go back to Anarchy since the roundup in 2021, when they devastated most of the herd. And I will go back. Real work as a filmmaker has been a factor in that too. But I've heard from a number of people, and we filmed that roundup, which was harrowing, to be polite. I've heard that it's just very different. Once you terrorize horses with a helicopter, those horses they change. And the Bureau of Land Management didn't return the horses that they ended up, they removed, I think, I want to get these numbers right. They removed the majority of the herd and then they re-released a certain amount of horses, but they basically dumped them in different areas and they weren't being cognizant of which horses were part of which herd. And the North herd and the South herd, the sex ratios are very skewed. So I've just heard there's a lot of melee at Anarchy right now. And there's just a lot of, there's sadness that I think people that knew the herd before the roundup can detect. I hope that isn't what people feel. And I don't think it's probably what people feel when they go there to see them for the first time. But I do feel like that roundup really, really tore the hearts out of the people that knew and loved that herd as it was.
Yeah, I hear that. It's a dramatic shift for everyone involved, and I guess spirituality speaking, we're all connected, and it's difficult. Do you have any horses of your own?
So we rescue horses when we can. I had horses growing up, and we still have 2 horses that we own now that are 2 wild horses we adopted following the roundup of Triple B. There's another little pinto that you'll see in the documentary. There's a shot of him all by himself, and one of the helicopters parted him from his family and drove him into the trap site. He was maybe a month old. And in witnessing that, we were a few miles away with a lens the size of an adult's arm, huge wildlife lens. And we saw that happening. And that's the moment I was talking about earlier, where my heart just broke in a way in my chest that I had never felt quite that emotion, that fury, and that sense of, this is so wrong and unjust and cruel and barbaric. And it was overseeing what they were doing to him. And so I turned to my husband in that moment on top of the hill, and I said, if he survives, I want to do something about it. And so we found him in the holding facility in Palomino Valley, Nevada. And he had been reunited with his mother, who was another deep, beautiful black mare with a beautiful stripe. And I called her Zephyra for goddess of the west wind. And he's named Zion for her son. And so they're stunning, stunning horses that have been gentled. I never gentled so that, for medication or just handling and doing some liberty work, but I never see them for them. In getting to know their personalities, I didn't see them ever perhaps being ridden. Zion, because he was so young when he was rounded up, he's a goofball and he loves humans, and he's done liberty work with some of the young people that are in my life or my mentees. And Zephyra, she was about 4 during that roundup, and she doesn't trust humans. She'll tolerate it, but it's clear to me that she would very much prefer a life in the wild. And that's really hard. Because like we were saying earlier before the show started, just kind of exchanging stories, they should be wild, but it's certainly better right now to be able to get some of these wild horses. If we could get all of them out, that would be the best case solution. But these holding facilities, in my opinion, are inhumane. Some of them don't even have shade, and how we're treating wild horses like that in these dusty, overpopulated, in some cases, corrals is just, I just don't know how the Bureau of Land Management is getting away with subjecting horses to that kind of environment to be forced to live in. It's so wrong. So many of the horses we witnessed are just, you see little foals just laying in manure, and there's no shelter from the elements. And so I'd rather see people, adopt these horses out of there. And if they can't be wild, it's better than being in those places.
Definitely. And it always gets so emotional when these roundups come up, and the space that these horses are forced to be in, and it's like, I don't know, their eyes seem to go dim. Their whole being seems to just leave. And I can't explain it another way. I've never been to a holding facility, so I don't have a memory, but I don't know. Your film did it. Your film, amongst many other videos, it definitely has a way of showing the people and allowing that heartfelt emotion for these beings, seeing their lives get stripped away, and there's no explaining it.
I agree. And you can see it too. We have some close-ups that we have, particularly of Stargazer at the end of the documentary, where you see that exactly what you're talking about, that light just go away. And it's, you see it in humans sometimes too, just as a filmmaker. It's something I've been really cognizant of since my teenage years. Just I've always been fascinated by the nature of focus. And if you're stressed or you're anxious, often, you feel like you're in your head, and it's like your gaze doesn't completely come forward because you feel cloistered or trapped, or there's just something going on that's so internal where that light of joy doesn't come out in the same way. And to, I think, the most extreme degree for an animal that, a lot of animals feel just in extremes where you can't justify why something happens. So it's either joy or terror. And to see those horses that we fell in love with, that were so resplendent in their wild environment and just exactly where they're supposed to be, to see the confusion and the depression on their faces, and particularly in their eyes, was, I have a really hard time still looking at the footage of that holding facility. And it's interesting that you bring it up, because I was just communicating with Stargazer's adopter a few days ago, and just talking about, she sent me a video of him and his favorite mare, and that light is back. And I think it's a different light a little bit, because now they're in a domestic, but it's clear that they're joyous and they've adapted to a new life. And we talk about it a lot. We would prefer to see them wild, but at least they're joyous again, and they have space to run. But we shouldn't be stripping that. We shouldn't be stripping that from any wild creature. It's wrong.
Yeah, definitely. I agree 100%. Can you tell me more about your Wild Beauty Foundation that helps these horses?
Absolutely. So when we started embarking on this process to try to raise awareness for wild horses, and also starting to understand why it was happening. And it's, like a lot of things, it's a fight over land and special interests, and predominantly it's a deference to tax subsidized livestock grazing. A lot of these big food corporations or ranchers want to graze their cattle or their sheep cheaply, and they want wild horses off the land. And that's not a fight with mom and pop ranchers. There are a lot of ranchers that most of them graze their livestock on private land. So we started the foundation to illuminate the truth behind the issue, because there's a lot of misinformation about wild horses. The Bureau of Land Management has been very effective in a misinformation and, in our opinion, a disinformation campaign, which willingly misleading the public, where they say wild horses are starving, they're overpopulated, we're rounding them up for their own good. That's patently false. And people get to see that in the documentary, where they say they're starving. Not true. They're fat and healthy. There's no forage. That's not true. There's plenty of forage. We filmed it. It's a drought. The water holes are full. So in realizing and it's a big entity we're up against the cattle lobby. I mean, there's a lot of money against wild horses, which a lot of us firmly believe the attack on wild horses feels like a smokescreen for the cattle industry to continue getting away with overgrazing on public land and basically treating public lands like their own. And so with the foundation, we felt like we could use our platform as filmmakers to try to raise the profile of the issue, and to get it into more of a national, if not international, conversation, because storytelling is so powerful, and journalism is so powerful. When you couple journalism with images, especially moving images, both beautiful as well as the harrowing stuff, I feel like we tried to very hard with the documentary to make sure there was a balance. I feel like that's what gets people to pay attention. And we also felt like we needed to encourage people to fall in love with individual horses, because they are individuals. And then you care about one or a family or a couple of them, and then you start caring about all of them. And so that's the filmic side of our foundation, was how it all started. And then that led into, in 2020, I was editing Black Beauty, and I ended up seeing there was one little gray mare that was in a kill pen, and kill pens are controversial because of, a lot of different reasons. I saw her and she was just terrified. And that light that you're talking about, the look on her face was just heartbreaking. And it was a Sunday afternoon. And I told my husband, I want to try to do something about her. She was in Texas. By the end of that Sunday, we had rescued all 13 horses that were part of her lot, and they were all different breeds. There was a pregnant warm blood. There were a couple of Arabians. There were 2 mini horses, a couple of wild horses, and we just took them all sight unseen. And that's where my small bonus for Black Beauty went to them and rescuing those horses. And then the next morning, my husband wakes up and he looks at me and goes, "Ashley, what did we do?" And that was also a big jumping off point to start the foundation, because adopting out those horses and finding the right people that they were supposed to be with was such a fulfilling experience. And a couple of those horses were paired with children that had undergone trauma. And to see the transformation of particularly 2 of those kids was life-changing for those young people, and so healing. And so that was a big part of it. So we film, rescue, and then on the educational side, I love working with children. So we've launched story competitions, and we're going to be launching a pilot for something called Wild Horse Week this fall, where we're going to release educational materials where a school or a church group or a barn or a troop can download the stuff for free. And we've had a number of experts consult on the curriculum, and they can learn about how horses helped build our world. And obviously prior to that, how they evolved, how they helped build our world, how they're still relevant today, and capping that week with an issue where young people can try to make a difference. Not try, but can. And so for this year, we're going to be asking children around the country to join us in a national letter writing campaign to protect wild horses. So we're going to be kicking that off this fall, and we'll have a lot of information on our Wild Beauty Foundation social media and a video about how to do it. And we're hoping kids around the country join us.
Well, this is all absolutely incredible. I think what you're doing, your mission is powerful and magical and has touched so many and will continue to touch so many more. Thank you so much for sitting here with us today. Are there any last minute thoughts you have?
Thank you. I think anybody who can get out into the wild, it's just the most magnificent place. And it really is life-changing to be out there and to just take a moment. I think we forget to be present in our busy lives sometimes. And it's so important to go out and do that, and take your kids out to see wild horses. And then if people want to help spread the word, please watch the documentary. Wild Beauty, Mustang Spirit of the West is everywhere now. It's on Amazon, iTunes, just Google it. It's everywhere. And we're asking people to share the trailer on social media with the hashtag I Stand With Wild Horses, particularly as this fall we embark on a campaign for the Oscars.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this and this conversation. It has been wonderful.
Thank you, Alyssa. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for just very heartfelt, inspiring questions. This was lovely.
Likewise.